class in SQL 101 and data manipulation and management. This class is writing queries. So this is a second class in the 8 classes I will go through in this course. This class in particular you'll start to learn how to use the SQL language or programming language to be able to obtain data from a table that's already stored, data that's already stored within a database table, and then be able to change the code to be able to manipulate it in different ways. So some of the ways that we'll do that is through clauses, being able to select what columns you want, and like the select clause, being able to select what columns you want, the where clause, being able to filter the rows to exactly what you want in the records. We'll learn about aggregate functions today. And that's where you have summation of a numerical value, or you could have a function that you use to just be able to format different data types or change parts of strings and so forth. So really, it's going to give you quite a few tools to be able to start getting into individual tables and be able to explore them and understand what's in the tables and be able to get the data that you need out of it. So SQL to manipulating data for manipulating data. Okay. So in the first class on Monday, we learned what the need for data manipulation and management is, what is the SQL programming language and why learn it. What is a SQL query? We ran our first SQL query. We got set up with MySQL Workbench, connected. We ran our Hello World query. And tonight we're going to build upon that. We talked about a relational database. A relational database is just a place, a server and databases where you can store tables and other database objects. They persist over time. So if you log out of it, then you can log back in and you'll still have the same data. And relational database in the sense is that later on in the class, we'll be able to relate tables together to be able to join them and combine data in different ways. So what is a table? A table holds data with records, and records are your rows or your columns and your fields. The records and the rows go horizontally down the table. The columns and fields go vertically along the table. Those are your named entities within the table, where each row of it is each one of your captured records. So we covered some of the most common data types like numeric, characters, dates, even some bit fields. Pretty much the 99% of what you will store within a relational database. And then a number of ways that you can learn more SQL. I'm a big fan of AI. We talked about that quite a bit. I even have a little bit to show you what I did here in the third hour related to it to be able to help you out. Right. Class 2 objectives, writing SQL queries. So building upon our knowledge from the first class, practicing common SQL clauses. We got a glimpse of that in the first lecture, like the select and where and the from. So guiding it to what table you get your information from, your order by, your group by, and having. So different ways to be able to direct the database to what information you need out of the table. We'll use common aggregations and SQL functions. I described that a little bit. So the aggregations are like your sums, your mins, maxes. It takes all the values over a column and then summarizes them into a single value. So the other ones are called scalar functions that we'll learn about. Those are functions that manipulate each value within a database table. So if you have 100 rows and you do one of those on a column, it'll manipulate each one. That's common with string functions or date functions. We'll dive into some of what you can do with that. We'll learn logical statements and operators. So that's like in your where clauses. Oftentimes in your where clauses where you're limiting records, there's also a couple different places you can use it. We'll learn more about that. Practicing comments for debugging or explaining code. So you will see that in a SQL file. It's just any of these comments that start with a pound. So anything after the pound sign in MySQL is considered a comment. Now that's different for each one of the database management systems, but for MySQL, this is the way you can do it. Some of them you'll do like a programming language. You do a / and then star back or or a backslash star. Wait, it is 2 backslashes or /. You do something like that in some of them, or you do 2 dashes. You can use pound signs, and that's specific to MySQL. And then we'll do lots of examples tonight in MySQL Workbench. Plan on getting, the lecture's not a huge lecture, so plan on getting through this fairly quickly so we can start doing lots of work and getting our hands on. One of the ways I learn the best is just with the lecture, then applying it, just getting my hands on the data and start to see what it does to a single table or anything really in programming. I just learn the concept first and then see how it applies. Then I can physically, almost like it's on paper, like actually see what happens when you apply these things, when you apply your knowledge or this code. Okay. And I have lots of SQL examples to help us out. So how's this class structured? This first hour, we'll cover queries and clauses. Second hour, we'll cover the SQL functions. And then the third hour, we will do lots of examples and then introduce a class project. So I'll try to give everyone, we'll try to stick to these hours here and give everyone a little bit longer break in between hours today. Okay. So what is a query? A query is a request to the SQL database for data to answer a question. When we query databases, we use a common language to get information. It's SQL or structured query language. We introduced that in the first lecture, but basically what SQL is, like the foundation of what MySQL or MS SQL or Microsoft Access uses to interpret what the programmer wants from the database management system. So by giving it these codes, or by giving it this code and these clauses and conditions and everything, the database then takes that and interprets it and then returns a result for you based on how it interprets your code. And it's a very strict way of doing it, as we saw. There are 2 required clauses, and then there are a number of other clauses that would help you return exactly the data set that you want. Tells the interpreter, the database management system, this is what you want to do, then it interprets it and brings it back for you. So it's a way for you to communicate with the relational database, if you think about it, like using the programming language to do that. Okay, so our first example is a world query that we ran in the first lecture. So obtain a list of countries within the continent of Asia. So that was our hello world query, but we'll go ahead tonight and run that code from the examples PowerPoint SQL.
Is there a way to dim a little bit?
Is it kind of hard to see?
For me, it is.
Should we shut off one of the lights in here? Maybe. Oh, dim it on my computer like a black. Do this as a black background.
Oh, so it's not just.
Is anybody else online having, is it hard to see the code?
Yeah, it's hard to see because it's too bright. In the room.
I know well, okay. I'll shut off this light.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay.
You can keep going and I'll do it.
I could also try to change this to a black background. I should do that for my eyes. Most programmers will change the view. There's usually a view in here where you can go to configuration or utilities. I always just go with whatever the default is, but to save my eyes, I really should consider using the black screen.
It's much better. Probably.
Okay. I'll look for how everybody can change it to about black screen if they want. I'll take a look at that at break. Okay. So you see in this example, we now have in the PowerPoint examples, PowerPoint SQL, we have that query that we saw in lecture 1. It's also on slides 6 and 8 of lecture 2. That query that we saw inside of PowerPoint, it's to select the continent and the name of the country, where the continent is Asia. We're ordering it first by continent and then country, descending, so from Z to A. And then we just want to see the first 10 rows. So highlight that, hit the lightning bolt. And it'll give you the same result that you see here in the PowerPoint slide. Like I was saying right before we started this broadcast, you can manipulate this in a number of ways, just changing around values. Say we want to limit it to 100 instead. Very effective way of being able to see what different levers you pull would do. And let's see, one of the things I should also mention is that whenever you execute any code in MySQL Workbench, you'll see it down here in the output. And if it executes successfully, you'll get a check mark, at what time. It'll tell you what query you ran and how many rows it returned. So let's go ahead and have it commit an error here too. So if we do that and we have an error in our code, you see it'll have a red mark there instead. It'll say undeclared variable 100A. That's because we shouldn't have any letters there. Then if you change it and rerun it, you'll get a correct result. So anytime you're running these in here, you know it ran successfully if you see it down here in the output and you have green check mark. And what query you ran and how many records it returned. So also a great way of just playing around with different things. If we change this to Europe, start to list all the countries in Europe instead. From Y down to A, or if we don't want it descending anymore, you could take this away. It would automatically default to doing it from A to Z, but you can also put ascending, ASC. Okay, so now you change that order, and now all of a sudden you have it going from A to Z. So playing around with these examples is a great way to learn and kind of pull the levers on SQL and see what different things do on the table. And don't worry if you mess up the code, you can always go back to Slack and download the latest version. I'll update it before every lecture, so you can go and get it and grab it. And you could start over if you made any mistakes.
So if we want to run, we'll do the certain query, we just select.
Yep.
it with the mouse and
Yep.
bolt. Yeah.
So that lightning bolt solid does, the one on the left, does anything you select. This one with the cursor runs everything down below it. So if I were to do that, it should run a bunch of queries. Although it's not doing that. Oh, it's just, no? Okay, hold on. If I run it, so I have the cursor on 9, so it should run that one, but it doesn't seem to be doing that. Okay. I'll look at that to see. Usually when you press that, wherever you're at in the code, it runs everything down below it from where it starts, and it would run all of these queries in this file. But for some reason, it's not doing that for me. So I'll take a look at that also during break. But the best one is to just select the code, hit this one without the cursor on it, and you always know exactly what you're running.
Oh, your file is the queries, but you still need a database. I see what. No.
Yep. Okay. So a little heads up on how to use MySQL Workbench to run queries and changing things and executing it, and then being able to see your output at the bottom each time you change, and then to see if it ran successfully or did not run successfully. Okay. So just described what a query is. We ran a query and how the running this code and changed it around. Each time you change it, the database interprets the new code and gets that information, returns that result for you that it interprets from your code. Okay. So common SQL clauses. So SQL clause defines the order of execution of a SQL query along with the related operations to obtain data from a relational databases. So your main clauses, we learned that in class 1. It's your from, which is the tables that you want data from, where the table that has the data you stored, you can say from world.country of the database, world and the table country to be able to get the data that's stored in that table. The from statement directs the database management system to go to that table using the from clause. Okay, so where is your limiting condition? This tells the database interpreter that you only want certain rows to be returned. So your where would be like in this last query, where continent is equal to Asia. You only want rows in the database where the continent is equal to Asia and not like North America or South America or Europe. So exactly where continent is equal to Asia. We'll learn different, we'll also learn different clauses or logical function, not logical functions, but nots, ands, ors, or likes to be, or even in to be able to do this in different ways. So not like an in would be not just one value, but it'd be in a group of values or between two different values. This is useful on a number if you're filtering numbers in particular, like you'd say in between the numbers 0 and 100 on a column. I also use it quite a bit on dates. So you could say between January 1st to 2025 and January 20th or February 28th to 2025. Then it would return all of the rows in that table between those dates. Particularly useful when you're looking at something like transactions and what days they occurred on. Okay. So that's your where clause. That's your limiting clause. Tells the database interpreter what rows you want out of that table. You have a group by, so you always use group by when you're using an aggregate function. So if you want to calculate the population by country, like you do here, or we have it in a query coming up, population by country, you would say country in your select here actually. Let's see if we have an example right here. So in your select, you'd want to, if you were doing the population by continent, you'd group by the continent. You'd have that and you'd sum the population. So anytime you use an aggregate function and you have a column with it, you'll use that in the group by clause. Okay. So having is like a filter on your function, on your aggregate function. So you would use that as we do down there. You would say having a continent that has population greater than 0, where the sum of the population is greater than 0. And we'll see these in action coming up. The select selects the columns out of the tables that you want in your result set or your return data set. It tells the interpreter, I want exactly these columns out of it and nothing more. So you can either have all the columns out of the table, but you don't necessarily do that. Maybe you only want part of the information. You could do select 2 of the columns instead of maybe there are 10 columns in the database or database table. This would tell the database interpreter to only get 2 of those. And then your order by is your last clause. After everything else is complete, you can order your results by a field. So it'll either be numeric from say 0 to 100 or all the different values, integer or decimal values, negative or positive, or alphabetically if it's a character field, or if it's a bit field, it goes from ones first and then zeros second. Or true. If it's a true or false or a bit field of 1 or 0, yeah, it will do trues and then falses. Okay. So joins, we'll learn about this in the 4th lecture. These are in the from clause, generally in the from clause when you have more than one table you're selecting from. You can bring those tables together in a few different ways. These are what these different keywords are. So you have inner joins, probably the most common, left, full outer, right, and cross. Those are by far the most common. Don't worry too much about them right now. You don't have to worry about it. Just know that they exist and we'll come up on it in class. Okay. So you have all these different operators that you can use. You could say country not in Asia, and then it would return all the other countries in the table. So it'd start to include North America, South America, Europe, Antarctica, and so forth. So it can be an exclusive, and would be that it needs to meet multiple conditions. So you could say a country is Europe the continent's Europe and country is Spain. It would only return that record in that instance. You could have a clause you could imagine where it meets both conditions and it returns multiple records too. You could say country's Europe and language is, what do we do? Well, do South America is easier. If you do South America and country is Spanish, it'll return most of those countries in South America. Almost all the countries do except for Brazil. Or would be as if either one of them is true. So in South America, or let's do the Europe example here. So if you have the country is Europe or country is Asia, it would return all the countries in Europe or Asia and nothing else. So logical conditions, so if either one is true, it'll return those results. Like is where you can start using wildcards and regular expressions, as Matt was talking about in the last class. Use those a lot on string values. You'd say, if you have a long address, that's all combined together. You could say address like NE, and it would return all of the addresses that have the string NE in it. And you can use different wildcards to be able to do that. We'll see that particularly in cleaning data, all the different things that you can do with strings, string manipulation. You can do between two values like I discussed. You can do in multiple values. So you could say country is in North America and South America, and then it would return all of those countries in North America and South America and nothing else. So it's kind of like an or statement. Sometimes it's useful to just list it all in an in clause. I'm pretty sure I have an example of that in here in this first lecture. I'll go ahead and find one for you. You can see how a lot of these have different ways of using the where clause. Let's just type in and see. Where we have one in this code. Maybe I don't anywhere. Nope, country in. So here's a piece of code. It's just simply select the country from a view, and we'll talk about views later, but where the country is in each one of those values. It'll return India, China, and Nepal. Okay. Then we have greater than, less than, not equal to, all those common operators. And then null. So this is important, especially when you're going through and trying to understand missing values. So null is not necessarily a 0 in this case, where there isn't any count of something. It's where the value just doesn't exist at all. So say somebody doesn't have a middle name, potentially, you could have a null value in the middle name because they don't have any middle name, it doesn't exist. However, if you have inventory and the inventory count is 0, like you ran out of inventory, that'd be an actual 0 because its account is that you don't have any of those widgets remaining. It can be, I explained this one because it can be confusing to people, but you'll see it in the database as a null value. It'll actually return a null value. So let's see if...
Does the database auto-assign that null to records?
It will if it doesn't have any value associated with it. So by default, usually by default, by default, it would put a null in it, but you could also tell it what to do in that case, and we'll see that later on. Let's see if we have any null values in the world city table. Maybe not. Let's do country language instead. Think of null as like if you sent in like a registration card, you can see the very last value is null, has nulls. But if you send in a registration card and you had to fill out a bunch of information like voter information, and that person didn't put anything in a field, that would be a null value. They just didn't put anything in there. And so you can't know what it would be. It's like incomplete or never filled in. versus a 0 of inventory where there was inventory, but it's just 0 of them. That's confusing. Sorry if I made that confusing and it made sense at first, but just wanted to explain the difference. You very much run across null values a lot in databases, even transactional databases, where there's a transaction and there's just no information for a certain field. Oftentimes, when you're understanding the data in a table, you will see how many null values are within a single column, how many values are missing from a column, and how many records they're missing in. It can either be right or it could indicate some type of error also, like it's not capturing that information. So null's a very important one. You have in your select clause, you can have distinct. So you only return distinct countries in the world dot, or you only return distinct continents within the world dot country data table. So let's go ahead and see this in action also. So select we're going to go ahead and do country. So one way to see quickly what columns are in a table is if you go into my SQL Workbench and you hit expand, and then you expand columns. So if I just selected from the world dot country table from the database world and country, you'll see that Asia and North America and these countries return multiple times. That's because it's just taking the entire column as it exists in the table, and it returns you all those values. So imagine that there are multiple countries in this table. We can do name as country. You see you have North America, Asia, Africa, Europe. And then all continent is doing here is returning all those values. So what the distinct will do is return each one of those just the first time that it appears. That's a really good way of just seeing what values exist inside of a column. So we see that in the table, continent is North America, Asia, Africa, Europe, South America, Oceania, Antarctica. Actually, I forgot what was in Oceania. I think it's probably Pacific Islands. Likely. But yeah, if you're curious about it, you could do country from world.city, where I'm actually curious. This is the way you can dig around inside of a database where name is equal to Oceania. And then when you do a string, you always do a parenthesis in the front, parenthesis in bottom. And so a string is like a character value. I call it a string programming, but if it was a data type inside of SQL, this would be like a varchar type variable, because varchar, so a variable character string, because you have these different continents of variable lengths. So this would be like a varchar, or maybe it's like whatever the longest one is. So probably just say like 20, potentially. Or it'd even tell us in here to go to down to name.
You put a number sign for the bar car.
Yeah, at the end of it. So how you usually define data types is varchar.
I can't see very well either.
Is it a little bit?
Yeah, I can't see it very
I
well.
bet it's
I
small.
just got new glasses, but I'm still
It is pretty small.
going to get a new.
Like I have to squint a little bit.
Let's see if I can zoom in here a little bit.
Number, bar car, and then in parentheses it says 30, 20.
Yeah. Let me make this bigger, huh? I don't have I always roll my mouse. What's another way of doing this? Zoom.
That would be great.
Put a little microscope on this thing.
You can control plus too.
I forgot what it was. Thank you.
It just doesn't like you, but it worked for me. I use control and then I use the plus on the numeric on the right of your keyboard.
Shift plus. Not working for me here. Yeah, I always should scroll it on my mouse. Should work though. No, that's a plus. That way. Come on, zoom. Sometimes you could do it this way also. I was trying to do a control Z. That feels like what you do sometimes. Okay, I'm going to grab my mouse. I was trying to get away with just a touchpad. But this calls for it. Oh man, there we go.
There you go. Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I was trying to see if I could do the results grid. It doesn't seem like I could do that one as much. There should be though. Oh, it's not letting me do it there. And not letting me do it down there either.
That's okay. If I can see what you read, then I can see what you're
Okay. Okay, sounds good. Yeah, let's see what's in this field right here. What countries are in Oceania? A known column country. World dot country where select. Because it's not called country, it's called name. One of the keywords we have in here is the as keyword. So when you select a field, you can rename it as something else. That's how you use the as. As works as an alias for whatever you're doing in SQL. So
where can I find like a glossary of these things like alias?
there's a SQL cheat sheet here.
Are you giving us something?
This is the only place. You miss it.
Should I miss?
You can always go back in the videos and watch this.
You said
You
said it already? What alias it is?
Yes, there's a SQL cheat sheet here near the end. That might be a good thing to just give out right at the beginning. Here, let's bring this up.
Are we in class? Are we doing a subset, or is that all one basically for SQL operators?
It's pretty much everything. So whatever I cover in here, it's like what I'd use like 99%, literally like 99% of the time. All the other stuff is like rare edge cases and can often vary from database management system to database management system. So I think my philosophy is if I teach you the stuff that you'll use like at least like 98% of the time,
Oh, that's
the other 2% that you can always look that stuff up. And you oftentimes it's really like super specific to Microsoft SQL or Microsoft or MySQL or Oracle database or whatever it might be. So an example of that the other day was when I was using Microsoft Access, and almost all the other ones have a median function. It's just one time I needed a median function to calculate some statistics on the data, and Access didn't have a median statistic. So I had to go create a different solution. Yeah, here in the as, here, I'll just paste this in there. There's a lot that I'm throwing at you right away.
Yeah, for sure.
So this one's actually a good one for everyone. In here, you can see that it has an as, rename column or table with an alias. This is actually really good as we talk about commands and clauses, operators, limit. You have is null. You can use is null with a inside the where clause. Don't worry about commit or rollback. Those are like database administrator type functions. But this gets you like pretty much all the way there. It's everything that we'll cover. It even has joins in here when we get do joins. We'll use these Venn diagrams. Select all the columns with filter applied. So it gives you like examples of some basic queries that you can write. This one's actually really pretty good. Data definition language, when we start creating tables in the next week, in the next lecture, you have create, alter, and drop. And data manipulation language. So how do you change data that's inside the table or insert or delete from it? And order of execution. So that's a good cheat sheet if it's easy for someone experienced to just shoot these things out. So this would be a good one to look at is if I'm going through things. And
if you do like every third row or every fifth row, stuff like that, then you basically create like a formula for it.
yeah, there are a number of ways you could do it. Depending on what you're doing, you could create a new field and just do an ordered number field and do like a divide by 3 or divide by 5 to get every fifth field or something like that. There are a few different ways. So one of the things in this class is there are a number of ways to be able to get this. You can possibly get the same result. That's why I just look at your SQL queries on the homework to just see if you get the right. Ultimately, it's mostly a matter of getting the right result. There are a couple different ways. Oftentimes, you could get the same result just through different means or just slightly different code, depending on how you do it, especially once you start joining tables together. Yeah, usually that's the simpler. It's like the KISS principle, keep it simple. It's usually the most efficient too if you get to be a real expert with databases. You start to and then know how to write queries to bring back data more efficiently. I don't really cover that too much in this class because it's something that you could learn on your own, and it somewhat depends on the database management system also and how it processes data. But most of the time, if it's straightforward SQL, the less is better. And some of the database systems, not to go on too much of a tangent, but they're designed differently for slightly different like workloads. So you have some that are more proprietary that can handle lots of transactions, or you have some that are lightweight for applications. SQL is always, MySQL is open sourced until Oracle tried to destroy it. Not tried to destroy it, but took it under their wing. That's what people like about this one. It's like an open source, open big community. Microsoft goes well with Microsoft products. Pretty good database too. They're all a little bit different, but you learn all the basics. You can just build it. You can build off the basics. That's why we in Data Science Academy, we may eventually do like a database administration class. But for any data analyst purpose, I think doing this is okay. And oftentimes, once you get on the job, you'll find if a query runs really slowly the way you wrote it, you can rewrite it a different way. And now that you have AI, just put it in there and say, what's a different way to write this that might be more efficient? Instead of hacking at it until you get a better result.
Yeah, that'd be interesting to watch your prompts at the end of the class to kind of watch you talk to it a little bit, you know. Like
I'll make a note.
Purposeful even being efficient and like make a mistake and just to watch, you know, normal language you use, talk to it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm deliberate in the language that I use. It's like if anybody's old enough to remember the Google, like when the Google search engine was new, you really had to tailor what you're saying to it in a way like that was specific to the results that you wanted to return. So it's like not putting too much verbiage into it or anything, just like almost exactly the words you want and like the order and everything. But it got to the point where basically you could just put anything into it and it kind of interprets it. But it's not always a perfect interpretation like AI. So that's like where you can refine it. But at the start, I could potentially show you some ways like how I am like more deliberate with what I wanted to try to do. And that's why one of the things, I'm going just a short tangent, but why it's not ready to take over coders' jobs yet is that for that reason, more or less, is like it still takes somebody with a little bit of knowledge to be able to direct the prompts the way you want to, like to get to where you want. So if you didn't know anything about programming at all, it may give you a code, but you wouldn't know like if it's actually what you want or where to start with it. I mean, AI can help you with that, but so for now, it really helps to like have the background and then being able to guide the prompts like in the direction you want it to and you want it to go. And the prompts are pretty good at doing that. I actually did that for the class project here too. I definitely directed it in the way I wanted it. Okay. So we were going to stop here at SQL functions. So we'll do the SQL operators real quick. We covered that here. Primarily used in where clauses, but it can also be used other places. It's a comparison operator, and it's a mathematical symbol which can be used to compare two values or sometimes more than two values, usually in the where select clauses. We'll see something called a case statement where we can kind of build our own logic and our own column inside a select clause. You can also use some of this in there. Okay. So the result of the comparison clause can be true, false, or unknown. An operator that has one or two null expressions returns unknown. So that's what I was talking about with the null values. It's more of like an unknown instead of a zero. It's just like never entered or purposely not entered or accidentally not entered for some reason. If one of those values in the columns, it'll go row by row. And it's oftentimes you're comparing two different columns. So you're comparing two different columns. If one of the columns is null and the other isn't, it can't make that comparison because it's not like a number or value or anything like that. It just doesn't know what to do.
When we were working on Tableau, we were just working on like just a spreadsheet of data, and like if we wanted to like make a query and represent that visually, I'm sure there's a way to do that with Tableau.
Yeah, in the project, I'll show you how you can put queries into Tableau. We'll do that as one of the last steps, but you can take these queries and put them inside Tableau and run it on a database. It'll return those results and then you can work with it. That is super awesome because it's an awesome way to get the data that you need and like create reports and dashboards. That's like the final product you usually have as a data analyst is like taking that information out of the system and answering the question and then displaying it to whoever you need. It's kind of like the end product. It's usually not some spreadsheet with 10,000 rows. Most people don't know what to do with that. So being able to visualize it or create a summary and saying, hey, look at this data. And the project, I think, will do a pretty good job with it. We'll do a pretty good job with that.
You plug it into AI and say, give me some, not analytics, but
You can plug it now into OpenAI has a tool that will analyze the data set for you. That's why I kind of jumped a little bit back into doing freelance work is because the tools are making it easier and easier to do that and like saving me a ton of time. So say you're getting paid, I shouldn't say how much I get paid an hour, but say you're getting paid $50 an hour and you can do it in half the time. You're making like double the money that way or less than half the time. Now I'm like, oh, this is like worth doing this work again. And it's kind of fun playing around with that stuff too. So you guys are lucky you're on like, not lucky, but you were learning it at a good time where you could have generative AI as assistant and save yourself hundreds of hours that I spent on hacking things together, wrong answers or whatever.
that's how you learn though.
It is, but I would, if you use AI right, I think that you can learn even faster that way. Like it's good, you have the classroom learning as like your basis, but you could learn super fast, like pairing with AI too. That's why I say go ahead and use it when you're in this class. If you come across something and you have trouble, you just get past it that much faster and you say, oh yeah, now I see the right answer, how you do that query. So as long as like you're using your brain along with your AI assistant, like I think it's a super tool. And no, that was what I was saying in the first lecture, like about schools and not using it is because so many people would just plug something in and not use their brain and like, oh, done. So many, when I was in high school, I probably would have done that on a research paper. As long as you're learning alongside with it, I think it makes the learning even faster as an aid, entirely as an aid. Okay. So SQL operators, we talked about those. Null values, I think we have a good feel versus nulls versus zeros, and then comparing them. Okay, so you have arithmetic operators, add, subtract, multiply, divide. You can do comparisons between two numbers. Well, you have those arithmetic operators, the usual ones that you do. And then you have comparisons. So equal to, greater than, less than, greater than or equal to. So almost always in SQL, you need to compare like similar data types. So actually, if you did like, is Nebraska greater than 3, it would say the comparison, you can't make that comparison. Now they're different data types. But you could do 2 different lengths of variable character fields and compare those two. and that would work okay. Oftentimes you want to try to get them the same data type, as much as the same data type as possible. We'll look at how you can do that actually as part of this class in the next hour.
Is there a limit on how many operators we can stack? If you're doing something really fancy, would you, or this is between this and this, but not this, or you can go as long as?
You can go as long as you could write code. I've seen where clauses that are like 20 lines long. Sometimes they can get complicated, and then the database may have a hard time processing it, and you have to worry about parentheses like order of operations, like you do in mathematics, like what it does first and second and third. But yeah, in theory, you could stack as many until the query won't work for you. Then you might have to think of a different way to do it. You have all your logicals like we do. These are all true or falses. And we've talked about those too. So the same query that we saw before, I won't run it this time because I want to give everyone a decent break here. But same world country, you could change the continent is equal to any one of those values. We can do that with a character string value because the continent column is variable character type. So we can compare one character string to a field that has character strings in it. You can also compare two fields. You could do, say for whatever reason, there's like a continent 1 and a continent 2. And you're trying to see if those two fields are the same or where they're different. You may compare one field to another also. And then it would go down each one of these rows and compare the values, the columns.
Just looking for it to see if it wants to take it for the final result.
Yep, so it would be, so what this does right here literally is it goes each row in the table, it says, is this true? Is continent equal to Asia? Is continent equal to Asia? Is continent equal to Asia? And it only does the ones where it's true. Yep. And that's why I said you could have two columns and you could compare, say for whatever, this isn't the greatest example, but you compare Asia to Yemen, Asia to Vietnam, Asia to Uzbekistan. And wherever those two matched, those are the results you'd return. You might do that on something like if you're doing a transaction and you did like a revenue where revenue is equal to gross sales or something. Maybe you didn't charge shipping, or maybe there's an error in it or something, your calculation. And you're just trying to find where both of those fields are equal.
Credit versus debit.
Yeah. For some reason, if it's a very equal or error or whatever, just searching through it. There are probably other good reasons I can't think of off the top of my head, but that was a lot there in that first hour. So let everyone digest and take a 15-minute break. Come back at 7:25. We will go through SQL functions. I will give everyone a break after that, and then we'll do some practice exercises, and then we'll introduce the project. You know what I did? I forgot my set of keys that unlocks the room upstairs with the snacks in it. It's like the only thing I forgot today. I'm like,
You're good.
I had it. I'm like, I only brought what I needed and not forgetting anything and nothing else, but that's what I forgot. You may be able to, I don't know, they're probably in the middle of class. I was going to say, get one of the people in the other class to let you in there. It's on the second floor. It's all the way in the corner. It's like room 203. So if you go out this way and up the stairs, it would be all the way in the back on your right. You have to wind your way, and there's a small hallway, and then contemporary analysis has a sign. They have like 3 rooms there. One's Nate's office, and then they have a Omaha Data Science Academy. They have a nice room in there. You could use it like a lab too. Have to ask Nate about having a class in there. Everybody could sit at the table, around the table, and just at the screen. I taught one of those. One of the first classes is pretty valuable. Had like 8 people attend in person. We didn't have online classes at first until COVID. Then we had to. But we had less classes because we needed enough people who could attend in person. So online classes, it kind of opened it up.
Yeah, it's hard to.
Hybrid classes.
I used to do a lot of training, of the agile training, and after COVID, it just got weird. Like at the beginning, there was almost a rush for people to get back because people wanted to get back. But when things opened up and we could go back, it rolled back into a lot of people being hesitant to come out. And I think it was refreshing for a lot of people to go back, and they were like, okay, we came back, we saw it, I'm going back to online. So right now, expectations, it's hard to tell who wants what.
Yeah, people get comfortable being at home. I know I get a little too comfortable, probably.
I think we all do.
I got to get home. It's healthy for me to get out of the house. Otherwise, I don't shave or shower for a couple days. Don't just lay on the couch, do my work, but not as active, and then just eating everything out of the refrigerator too.
Streams for like 3 days where I never got out of the house. But I didn't need to.
I'm ordering Grubhub. Gaining 30 pounds.
A lot of people probably have that situation since COVID, really.
Yeah, now a lot of offices they're having people go back, forcing people to go back. I get it, actually. The hybrid is like ideal. Actually, even when I do consulting, there's still some level of like working that you can't replicate, working with something in person and just hammering it out or understanding their challenge. And then you could go home and then you could do focused work as long as you can focus. I've worked at some places where it's just kind of, I'd go ahead and call it a circus inside the office. And when you're trying to do like focused technical work, it needs it easy to get disrupted. Free for all is another good word for it. It's good for technical work. It's 10 times if you understand the assignment, technical people can work together and collaborate online. Or if you're an analyst or in marketing to some degree, if you're just mostly doing content or your own work. If you're doing your own work and it doesn't really depend on other people, those are the best remote jobs. I have found, though, that there's just nothing that beats going to talk to people in person. Even like if you're working remotely for somebody, it's kind of like they can toss any work that they want at you. You're just like you are a person, but they take it for granted as a like they can just toss you anything. And like they can just ping you for anything.
Yep.
Instead of being at the office and like having to ask you for it. Can become disorganized chaos too if Oops, sorry there, everyone. I just realized I was disconnected. Internet connection disconnected. But we'll get restarted here in just a minute.
And apparently it's got.
That's me. Okay, everyone, I'm finally back. Sorry, I got disconnected and then started having some problems here. But I switched to my phone hotspot. So see how that goes. But with that said, to you, we'll hustle here and get started so that we have some working time at the end. And if we have any technical issues, we can sort through those. Okay, everyone online can hear me. We're good. Again.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry for the delay there. All right, we're back. We're back up to it. Go ahead and share. Okay. Can see. Yep, looks like everyone can see the screen. Okay, so second part of the writing queries lecture, we've covered operations and clauses and a lot of those different things that you can do with data in a table. We are going to cover SQL functions with the second hour. So what are SQL functions? So these are built-in operations or calculations that perform those calculations and return values. They're also used to manipulate data without changing the original values. So what that means is that when you return a result with a query, if you do a sum on a field, it leaves all that original data in that table alone. It doesn't change that. It's just changing the output that you do for the query. So what's good is that all of it becomes repeatable because it doesn't change any of the data in the table. It's just changing what results are returned to you and what you see. So these are essential for data analysis, transformation, and reporting. So imagine you wanted to summarize sales trends for a business. You could summarize all of the sales by month. You could group by month and summarize all the sales in a column. And that's super valuable to be able to look at that trend to see if it's increasing or decreasing. And then you could operate on single values, entire columns, or groups.
I'm on them. I'm watching.
Somebody's on the phone.
Yeah. Let's
see if we can mute here.
Oh, you got a text starting? Oh, okay.
Samuel. Make sure everyone's mic's muted. Okay. Okay. We're good to go again. So where was I? You can operate on single values, entire columns, or groups of data. So when you group by, that's like a group of data. So you could sum over all of the customers or you could sum over all the products within your catalog. That's a good one. So if you think, then you want to dive deeper into the sales trend, you could do it by item and see the sales trends over months. You can do that on a single value or entire columns. So those mathematical ones, the sums, they will do it over the entire column in a database table. And then if you do a where clause and limit it, it'll only go over those records that you do in the where clause. So it's important to remember the order of what the clauses do, which things. It can do also single values. So an example of that is like a date value where you want to add 30 days to the date value. It'll just go through each record or each row within a column and it'll manipulate each one. So this would add 30 days to each one of those values. This is just a value that we gave it. So this would be a single value, but if you did it on a column, it would do that on each one of the values. And then return that result set to you while it leaves the data in the table the same. So really you're just using these to manipulate data for the results that you're returning to yourself. So some examples of these. All of these are on single values. The uppercase, so you can change hello world value to hello world, or you could do that within a column, change them all to uppercase. Really good for standardizing values. There's like a mix of lowercase and uppercase. It could potentially make doing where clauses easier. You could round.
Is that for display purposes, or this is your modifying data for the function, the hello world?
So for display purposes. So you aren't when you're writing SQL queries, you aren't modifying the data in the table at all.
Right.
So it's for display purposes, but you could also do this in a where clause to make things easier. So like, say you need a certain value, maybe it's a bunch of mixed lowercase and uppercase. If you did it all uppercase, it may make the comparisons easier that way. I did one for a client. They had job codes and they were somewhat inconsistent. Some of them were lowercase and uppercase. It made it easier to convert them all to uppercase and group them together. Otherwise, it was creating them as separate groups. It was treating the lowercase different than the uppercase. So some of it is kind of like cleaning up data too for grouping or comparison purposes.
Because you can only throw it like anything, say Excel table or save another instance where it's the clean, right? Where you have what you're displaying as the actual values.
Yep, we'll do quite a bit of this in my lecture in cleaning data. Be like the 5th lecture. Seems to be this is a popular one. You can round decimals to a given decimal place, or you can add the number of days like I was talking about. So the ones that are over entire columns or sums, you could sum the total sales amount over the entire table. You could also do it over products. So what you would say is select product, sum the sales amount from sales, and then you'd group by the product. So if you're doing it over a field that you aren't summing, that's where you use the group by. And then count customers. This is just counting all of the records in the customers table. So assuming this table solely has individual customers in it. If you count star, that just counts all the records in the table. It gives you the number of customers.
So, like, how is data generated someplace? It's just automatic. Somewhere there's just like data being generated, just enormous amounts of data being generated by like people going to websites and what they click on, and just all kinds of data just automatically being generated.
Yeah. So oftentimes that data is stored in a relational database table. So then you could take that data and then summarize it and do different things for analysis. So
you have to access the data, and this is what this is all about, because the company is already keeping the data, but you just have to like be able to.
yeah. Yep, they store it in the relational database.
And relation are keeping data these days.
Yeah. Maybe not always in a relational database, but ideally in a relational database. Makes your life easier. They could store it in Excel sheets or text files or anything really. But
so they could put the data in, but then there's also like machines and functions and software that gathers data for it.
It's usually a combination of both. Like there are people working inside of a system and it's gathering transactions while people work inside of it. And they're like entering things into the system. So oftentimes there's like a lot going on underneath the covers. Almost all applications write some type of regular database or some relational database. Like if you're using like any...
Everything online is gathering data.
Yeah. Yeah, and almost usually they'll be writing it to some type of database behind the scenes.
Like usually the cloud.
Often in the cloud now, yeah.
What Oracle is? Sorry, I don't think such a novice.
Oracle, not so much, but you have AWS, so Amazon,
Okay.
Google, and Microsoft Azure are the 3 biggest ones.
Okay.
I teach those in my engineering class.
What happened with, what was the data just like before these 2 big ones?
What's that?
In the old days, what was the beginning of it?
Usually text files. That'd be really the olden days. Still, a lot of systems produce log files that they don't store in databases, or they load it later, or you load it later. Be like a long CSV file, text file.
Nowadays, not really texts and logs and CSV files.
No, you still see that.
Is that the background of it?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's usually a lot that's going on behind the scenes. That's what people don't even know. It's like the tip of the iceberg. oftentimes.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm wondering, but it's like Azure and AWS.
Yeah. Yeah, what people see is just that interface,
Right,
and then it's like the iceberg underneath of it, the database and
right.
all of the processes that are going on underneath and how data is stored. Usually it's not stored very well for analytical purposes, which we'll also cover in this class. You have to transform it for that, like we're doing here.
Okay.
Like I'm teaching this class somewhat like how you would do it with applications, like how it's online transaction processing, so how you capture transactions out of a system, but mostly with the idea, with the focus on being a data analyst, what you would use specifically to analyze the data in the role of a data analyst. But it's still important to know both, like understand how systems capture data and then being able to change it and the tools that you have to do that.
And we're going to learn how to transform it, as you're saying.
Yeah. And that's some of what we're doing now with functions and doing different things. Yeah.
Because like I'm just assuming that the data is not going to be like perfectly clean.
No, it hardly ever is. That's why we'll do one lecture on cleaning data coming up. It hardly ever is. And it takes a bunch of time to clean it up. Oftentimes it might work for transactional purposes, but you have to clean it up for analytical purposes.
Do you foresee a time where like AI could do that?
Yeah.
Probably in the near future.
That's probably one of the first frontiers of how it could.
Do what?
Data quality.
Yeah.
Oh,
Some of the tools are already doing it, like Snowflake.
Snowflake does?
There are BI tools that somewhat do that, in ETL
So there
tools.
is BI apps and BI software.
I used to teach a class or one lecture here on enterprise data, but I just made it an extra lecture. And it's part of that, some of the tools behind the scenes that help you manage analytical data are starting to do that too.
Probably like AWS will probably have that as part of their services then at one point in time. So the companies don't.
I think Microsoft is doing some of that. They're trying to do some of that too in Azure. Trying to add AI to more places, but being able to fix and transform data. Especially for AI, you need it for AI building AI models. You need data in a certain way and transform it and clean it up, like trying to automate those processes. Yeah, this is hands-on, the hands-on way.
Yeah, good.
I don't know. I don't even know where AI is going, honestly. I would say like you're in pretty good shape. Like it all needs human interpretation, I guess, until this stuff doesn't need human interpretation anymore. That you always have a job doing it. There's always people who need data. And it's not like hardly any businesses actually, like it's talked about a lot, but hardly any businesses know how to use it yet or have implemented it. There's still all the small businesses in the world or sized businesses that have no idea about it. So it's still a little ways, but who knows the trajectory.
Whoever gets it right, they'll get off.
Yeah. But I see it's coming. Okay. SQL functions, those are examples. So you have column functions or single value functions. I call them scalar functions. So this talks a little about it a little more. Scalar functions, it's a single value based on an input. You can do upper or lowercase. You can round a value, absolute value. Those are the ones I use the most. Aggregate functions operate on a set of rows and return a single value. So you can imagine summing over all the values of a column or counting them or doing an average or a min or a max. The example that I talked about, I was using a median, which most database systems have that built in. I use it a little less frequently, but if I'm calculating statistics on a database, maybe. And I found Microsoft Access doesn't have that function, which is kind of weird, but it's always things that you can look up. Like I ran across it just assuming that it'd have it, and then I had to go do my research when it didn't. But by far,
It's all connected with like Excel, and Excel has a media function.
yeah, Excel still, I use Excel a lot. Really,
Are there
just
any services that
They call it average now. They don't have median. I think I just did this for a class.
these functions can also be called different things in different relational database systems, with the difference between Microsoft SQL Server and MySQL or Oracle. Instead of average, it may be called mean, or it may be the whole word average.
Yeah, in Excel.
But they all have it. All the relational databases will have that function. I focus in this class on Microsoft SQL Server, or not Microsoft SQL Server, I say that, MySQL. And then like the functions there. But if it's like a different relational database system, it's usually just a different keyword or something just slightly different. And these are the ones that I'd say, use those 95% of the time. Dates, you use those a lot. Date and time functions. Adding to a date difference between two date fields is super common. Get date would be like getting the current date, like whatever your system date is. So if I ran it right now, it'd be, you probably just do that. This is a trick. You can do this even without telling it that you need a table. So this is the only situation where you don't need a from clause, is if you just have like a single value you're returning. Oops, and I got logged out of SQL Server. If I just ran select get date, that doesn't seem quite, is that not the function for MySQL? Let's look it up. MySQL get current date. Cur date. Must have done the I must be Microsoft SQL Server. I need to update that in the notes. So current date, it'll get 2025 313. So that one's actually the MySQL function. And you can see what's good about the IDE is that if you type in date, it'll start to give you different recommendations for the functions. So date add, date format, you can even have a time. If you did the timestamp function, I use timestamp a little bit too. Keyword time. That didn't seem to work for some reason. Time. Okay. I have to get you the right SQL function for that. There's a SQL function too that will return the time. So there, date time. Always can look these up also. We'll get the right one for you. Okay. You'd also use time functions in here. I just listed date ones, but you could also have time functions that oftentimes that's valuable to put a timestamp on a record, like the date and time, like a record was created. That way you can trace it back historically, know exactly when it happened. String functions manipulate text data. Concatenate is putting together two variable character text strings. You could do the substring of one, so you could do like the first three characters. You could even do, oftentimes they'll have like a middle function, like in Excel, where you could do like a middle 4 characters from the 4th character from the left or right or something like that, whatever the index is in the string. You can replace part of the string. One of them, the super value, is trim, so that would take off any leading or trailing blanks, which can make all the difference when comparing 2 text strings also. If there's one that has my first name, Jeremy, and then one that has another field that has Jeremy with the space at the end, the computer will think it's different. The database will think those are 2 different strings. So being able to trim both those leading and trailing spaces is huge for comparison or data cleanup and so forth. Then mathematical functions performing numeric calculations, square roots, power, or log sign. I actually don't use any of those a whole lot after I said I put on here mostly what I use, like 90%, but we already learned some of the other ones too, like mathematical functions, min, max, average, sum, and count. So just some additional ones that you can do. There's a whole huge libraries of these. If I have a link.
Oh, really?
Yeah, if you just wanted to see everything that's possible. MySQL functions. You could go to W3 schools. Here are all the different string functions. This one's probably valuable in string. You're finding a substring within another, like a small character string within another string. Locate the first occurrence of a string. Removes. They have an L trim and an R trim, whichever one you want to do. Middle is what I was talking about, substring, extracting a substring from a string. I'd probably go here to W3 schools because usually the documentation on like a database website is pretty technical. It can be a little hard to read. And these are like simplified versions of those. And then you could see an example. W3 schools is like the best at this. You can reverse the results and then try it yourself. Then it just reverses the text string. I don't think I've ever used reverse, but you know it's there.
I see that maybe with some weird OCR or something like that is
They stored it backwards. I don't know either. Or maybe if you're parsing it, somehow it is more efficient to reverse it from the back. I don't know. But you can know that it's there by looking at that documentation. I'm going to put that in. I'm going to put that in the slide for our notes and resend it to everyone. We'll do list of MySQL functions with examples. It's a copy and paste from a different slide. So I'll send everyone that update so that they can have that link. Okay, so example of an aggregate function. What is the total world population by continent? We saw this earlier in the lecture. But if you think about this on what order these are done first, it helps you understand how you get to this result. So in our first lecture, let's do this. If you remember this chart, I think it was in here anyway. The order of these. I don't see it though. Okay, let's just look it up. we'll just do one of these. So it's always the from, what table, and then where filters the base data. So it'll go what table you're getting it from, then your where clause, what records you want to limit that to. Yep. So I always think it helps to think about how the database interprets this to get this answer in the background. Okay. So from the table is first, you'd select what tables. The where is you filter the data in that where clause using those conditions. You group by some grouping, like in here in this query, it'll be country, and then you're going to summarize on that table after you've limited the table. Having it's like a filter on the aggregated table, so you could say country greater than all countries greater than 0 and eliminate Antarctica. Then you have select, so that's the columns that it finally returns. And then order, you're always sorting last. After you get everything, then you can sort it for visual purposes. And then limit, so after you've sorted it, say you want to only see the top 10 records. For whatever reason, you can do that. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this. We have quite a bit of this in here, and I'll explain it as we go through it. Okay. So if you go to PowerPoint SQL, it's getting small again. Okay. Here's our example of aggregate function. So it does this from first. So from world.country, we selected our table. It does not have a where clause in it. So it's going to take all the data that's in that table and not limit any of the rows or records that it's going to calculate the result on. Now you could enter a where clause and it would do that first. Say, let's go ahead and do that. Let's just do where continent is. Let's do this. Where continent is in, I'll show you the in keyword, Europe, South America, North America. So we're just going to limit it to those 3 continents. So we'll limit we'll limit the records in it. Then we do the group by. So we want to group by each one of these continents. So we'll get the total population in Europe, South America, and North America by summing and then grouping by continent. After that, you'd eliminate sum of population greater than 0. So let's put Antarctica in here also. Antarctica, Antarctica. Yeah, so Antarctica is the country that has only 0. So it'd keep everything else and then order by continent at the end. And we'll do this ascending. So it should go Europe or Antarctica, Europe, North America, South America, and exclude Antarctica because of this having clause. So let's see if I'm right. Yep, it has Europe, North America, South America with those total populations. And the query is solely just the results that it returns. It keeps all that data behind it intact because so that you can change the query and end up getting different results. But you could always go back to this query and get the same result. So if I did this, want to make a point of that this doesn't change the data underneath. This will give you Asia, North America, and South America. If I change it back to Europe, it gave you the same result as we saw before. Make sense?
Yeah, my computer started doing something weird, like, it's like, it's in shift mode, and I don't know how I did it, how I got it there, so everything is capital, and it's just like in shift mode, like I must do a single quote and a double quote came out. I don't know how I just automatically got in shift mode. You know, it did. So I've never happened before, but so I wasn't able to do it.
Oh no. Here, I'll get through this. Let me get through these last few slides and then I'll help you out. Okay, so control flow function. What is the total population by continent? So we have, so control flow function, we didn't cover that in the functions. We just said scalar and aggregate. But a control flow function are like these case statements where you can control the flow of the logic. These can be either in the where clause or the select clause. This is like when you use a case statement, we're using this as like a created column now. So why it's called control flow function is because it will go through each one of these steps one by one. So let me explain how this works. So the very first one that it'll do, it will compare continent to these values. And if it is true, then it'll return the value Eastern. If the right continent, so I use a right function here, and then say if the right 7 characters are America, then Western, because this would be North America and South America. So I'm trying to classify these into 2 hemispheres and create this as a derived column, but it'll do the first condition first. If it says it's false, it will do the second condition. If that's false, then there's a default condition at the end. And then if it hits the first condition, then it stops execution and gives that value. So let's see this in practice too. So if you think about how this works, the order of execution is the same. This will be a little bit different. You'll do the from clause first. So we're selecting world.country. We have no group by or where, so it's going to do it over the entire table. Then the group by, that does have group by hemisphere. Let's put hemisphere in here then. So we'll group by hemisphere. So this column that we created called hemisphere, we can use that in the group by. And then after that is group by. We have no having clause to limit any of the sums. So we go to the select clause. We'll select those 2 columns. We'll have a hemisphere and then the sum of the population over those hemispheres. And then no order by either here at the end. So some of these keywords, like at the beginning, like we said at the beginning, are optional. But I want to go through the order operations of how this query works. Unknown column hemisphere. Oh, you know why? Okay. So one thing that you can do, I already created the column hemisphere in MySQL. I give it an alias called hemisphere that we talked about earlier in the lecture. So instead of just this column not having a name, in the result set, I call it hemisphere. And then since group by comes after, you can use it by reference or alias in the group by in MySQL. You can't do that in all the programming languages or SQL programming language or SQL databases, database management systems, but you can do it here. So what this ended up doing, so let's trace through this. So it says continent. If it's in Asia, Africa, Europe, or Oceania, it's going to sum all of those records that equal Eastern in the table over the continent column, or over the population column in this grouping. And it's going to return that total population for Europe for all the records that meet this criteria. Then the second part is I'll create this column, or I'll create this value for hemisphere. If the right two were in America, so we have Western Hemisphere, and it's going to sum over all those records that are in North America and South America. And then last, there's Antarctica, because we didn't include it in any of those. So it's not true here. It's not true here. Otherwise, we just say default to the whatever the continent name is. Or that's not right. So we say Western or else continent as hemisphere. Yeah, we default to the continent name as a hemisphere. So what it ends up doing is false, false, default the continent name, and it gave the hemisphere the continent name of Antarctica to that hemisphere. Okay. So just tracing through how that works for you. Now we have the power of case statements. So you can create this as a column. You could even create this as a comparison in the where clause. We'll see an example of that later. Okay. And then scalar function, how does this work? So there's a table in here that's world.country still, but there's a column that has a date function in it, or has a date. So if we just take a look at this, world.country. So you see, we've been typically looking at these two columns, but there's also a column here. They have an independence year. And you see a lot of these are nulls, so they just don't have the information for whatever reason. So null is no information. And what we're doing in this query is, let's see. So we're selecting the name of the country, that independence year, then the year is the start year from world.country, where the independent year is greater than 1991, 1-1. So what we're doing, so for a moment forgot what I was doing here, but we're creating this column so we can compare that value all the way down the table and be able to get all of the countries that have a year greater than or equal to 1991 as their independence date. So just in going to the table and saying what countries have recently declared independence.
And that data, I guess, is in the table.
This one we created this date as a start year, and we're using it as a value to compare.
But in the table, there's an in-depth year.
Yeah, the independence year is already in the table. Yep. From world.country, and then we compare the independence year against that date calculation that we used. You see one other one that we just brought into it. We brought a cast into this. Oftentimes, dates will be, the database will consider these variable character strings. So what we're doing is that we're making this date as a string. The cast converts it, and then you give it a data type to convert it to. So we're converting this, that the database thinks this is a string, and then we change it to a date. We use the year to just get the year out of that date, and then we compare that against the independence years. So now we have integers versus integers to compare. And then this should be ordered by independence year descending. So descending would go from newest to oldest. So let's go ahead and run this query. Just
Do you want to have this since date?
yeah. I probably use that the cast as a date time or a date or something like that the most, because systems can store dates in any number of formats.
So you can put like cast this and then cast this and cast this. You can use cast.
Yeah.
function or-
And it usually works. Sometimes you have to get creative with the dates and how you calculate, how you parse it or calculate it, and then convert it. But it's by far what I use the most is casting like dates that are stored as strings as a date.
And cast is just for dates.
Now you could cast, sometimes numbers are stored as character strings. So say you had the number 19 and it's just stored as a string for some reason, a character, a varchar. You could convert that as integer. Or you could convert it to a double. You could take an integer 1, convert it to a double. Then it'll do 1.00 as a double. That might be useful for doing a calculation with other decimal numbers or float numbers that convert an integer to that. Or for comparison purposes also. But yeah, I'm mostly doing that as parsing and cleaning that up. We'll also learn that in data cleaning, SQL data cleaning, and then order by independence year. So we'll go ahead and run this. It gives the same result. It takes this, casts it as a date, compares all of these against the database table for the year, and gets all those that are greater than or equal to 1991. Well, mostly former Soviet Union countries. Let's see if there's anything else. What's that? There's one in here. Oh, the Velvet Revolution, yeah. All right, so that's how that works. So class review.
Yeah, I figured.
Have one of my managers, he moved from Moscow when he was like 15 years old. So he has a lot of stories. He's a good guy too. Anyway, class 2 review. We actually covered a lot here, as what a lot of people say in the class, but now we get to go and practice it. So what are the common SQL clauses? It was the ones that you think about the order of how they're executed. What are the common aggregations and functions? We covered that in the second hour. How do you utilize comments for debugging or explaining code? Said at the beginning, that's the pound sign that you can use. And I use that. I put these in green here in the lecture. Yep, so comments in the SQL code, they start with the pound.
So in the code, you can just put a random comment in there and just for yourself in the code?
Yep, so if you notice in the
I did notice it, but I didn't.
PowerPoint SQL.
Yeah, I did notice it, but I didn't know that was just like telling us something, but that's actually something you put in the code.
Yeah, I put it in the code. It helps direct the students to like what each part of the code's doing.
But besides just students, like just real life, can you just put little comments in there for other people?
Yeah. It's really valuable if you don't see a piece of code for a while, and like you don't have to remember it quite as much, especially in development. If you do that, that's like the biggest. But even with SQL code, it can get complicated, and like you don't run it for a month or two, and you have to like remember what you're doing. But if you put like little, kind of like putting little breadcrumbs here to remember what you were doing or like why you filtered something. It took me half a minute to remember what I was doing on this one, actually. I had looked through it and remembered, but if you put comments there, it can be really helpful, especially once you start if you start producing a lot of code also. And then you go back to it maybe only once a month or once a quarter or once a year. I probably start forgetting things if it's multiple months. If it's like a quarter at a time. Good rule to document it. And we covered these in pretty high level of detail. Aggregate functions over the entire columns, and then scalar functions and value functions are the ones that go value by value. And then we also did control function in here. So we started to learn about the case statement and how that works. That's really powerful in being able to do multiple conditions. Check a column against multiple conditions. Use case statements a lot. Especially to derive your own columns. Okay. Additional resources. I gave my SQL tutorial for it. W3 Schools is also really good. This is a good website. I was looking at this one too. All these best ones will explain like aggregate functions and then like give you pictures to show like the original and then how it's transformed. And then this has a bunch of the aggregate functions here. They even have JSON. JSON's popular now, so they even have aggregate functions for JSON. So just a type of format you can store data in. Yeah, they're JSON files stored now too. That's a lot of fun.
We're not going to call it
JSON. Some functions, all these best ones will give you like the original example. Also, if you need more practice, and then you can try it out. So this MySQL tutorial or W3 Schools they're both awesome. Okay, I introduced everybody to the SQL cheat sheet. If it helps you print it out. A lot of it at the beginning is just learning the jargon, or the jargon's not that familiar, or the keywords and terminology and stuff like that. This is really helpful in doing that. Posted that.
The quiz, are you going to expect us to say, hey, this is an operator, well, this is a function, but this is this type of function, is that kind of...
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
We need to learn kind of to orient us.
Yeah, the quizzes will be more related to the content that we learned in lecture, and then the exercises are go into practical, go do it yourself. Okay. I'm going to give everyone a 5-minute break just as like a timeout. And then we'll do a couple practice exercises. I'll take you through it. Show you where you can do some additional practice. I also, I have a bunch of additional practice everybody can do. And then I'll introduce everyone to the class project and give you your first homework. But I feel like everyone could use a quick timeout here. Just for a quick 5 minutes, though, because I have a bit to cover in the last 30 minutes. I always plan on getting to this point at 8, but I never quite make it. That's okay. It's good to just pause and answer questions sometimes. Instead of just plowing through it or get distracted by AI talk.
Thank you for answering my question.
No problem.
I like to see how this could, like, in a learning context, is really focus on like employability.
Yeah, how it relates to when you're on the job. I try to do that a lot.
Like, what can I expect? Like, what kind of job should I look for?
Getting a lot of value out of it. That's good.
goes into shift mode, and you don't have to help me, but I'll almost figure it out. Did that ever happen before to you? That never happened to me before.
Huh.
No?
What is it?
No, like, let me go.
I guess you figured it out.
No, I didn't. I did not figure it out. Here. So it was an aggregate. And like here, I put continent and then I started putting this and then I wanted to put single, this one, I wanted to make this and see if it's still doing that. See? I don't know.
Is it like one of your shift is stuck? I've had that happen.
This is a brand new computer. I don't know. Like, I just am trying to do like the single quote.
There's also a thing.
Like continent, I wanted continent to be, what?
Windows called sticky keys.
Okay.
I've had that happen before. If I
I'll Google
press
it.
it like a few times,
Okay.
and then it
I think I did that.
takes the key.
I think that happened. I'm having a lot of problems.
If you like press one key really fast.
Yeah, I think I probably did that because I'm having like I put my hands all over like everything, with the laptop.
Yeah.
I'm not good at kind of keeping my hands off of it.
Yeah.
Like I erase, like I write things and then I erase like whole thing, because I touch the wrong thing with my
Yeah. Oh, I got it. You accidentally hit something. Combination. So I'm going to actually going to introduce a class project. Give everyone another minute.
Is that for the entire class or?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, all the homeworks follow the class project. So as we do them, like each one of the homeworks will follow this until you get to the end. I'll show you something neat on how I put this together. I'm spending a ton of time on putting a classic project together, but I did this using Claude. And I just started. I had to guide it a little bit.
What you created from scratch?
AI did most of it, but I had to guide it. Well, that's where I did the median the other day. Okay. So I was doing it all in the same. So I showed everyone the, when I was working in Excel and trying to recreate the median and guided this, I put the project in the same one. Okay.
So you don't do the same homework every semester.
No, I had been, but now we could just use that homework as more practice examples. Because here I said, create a class project for SQL101 that follows the following topics. So it follows the topics of each one of the lectures that we do here in class. And it did a pretty good job, except it was a little, the writing queries was a little bit farther than we actually were at. So the project, I think it'll be take you 3 hours for each homework, and then 3 times 8 or 7 homework. Well, 6 homeworks, because I don't do a homework for the first. I kind of combine the first and second one lectures, and then I don't do one for the 7th lecture. It gave me a pretty good outline of what a class project would look like. I was thinking about doing it with crypto, but the other database is a lot better.
So I did a contract with it. I did a pilot for products for a property. It's late in the evening. A property sales, a property investment. What do you call that? Selling properties business. What is that called?
Real estate?
Yeah, commercial real estate. I did a pilot for commercial real estate. I just came up with an idea, and my only holdback was that the commercial attorneys were telling me this can't be done. So I went to ChatGPT, and in 4 hours I had the contract.
Yeah. I was struggling with the other class project on making it something that the students could easily do. And I probably spent like 100 hours doing it, like trying to refine it. And I did this in 3 or 4 hours. So I got the overview. I said, provide a description. Okay, so we do a description of this database. Then I say, like, use this database, create a narrative, combine that with your outline for the class project. And it did a super nice job. So I got the outline right, and then I fed it my PowerPoints and told it to remove stuff. And I generated some images here also. And then I told it to give me a homework based on it. And I cleaned up the homework a little bit too, but spent 3 hours on it.
The outline itself takes a long time to work.
Yeah. To think through exercises and come up with them is what takes the longest. And then come up with data that's easy for students to use and that's already clean. This database comes from MySQL. So I'll go ahead. I'm going to introduce the class project to everyone because I want to get everyone started on the homework. And then I could show you, we'll do some examples in class, and I could show you how you can do those yourself too. Okay. So the class project, the purpose of this is, in this class, I like to be very much practical and what you would see inside a business as a data analyst, so that you can take these skills and apply them and be able to go and do that work. So I have this process, it's like a crisp DM process. It's a data science process, but it applies well to just problem solving in general with data. So the first step is that you understand the business problem, asking and I do this as a client, trying to initially clarify that problem as much as possible, really understanding it. Sometimes they may not necessarily know, or it might be actually some other issue, but you try to do that as much as possible. The second you understand the data, now you have SQL skills to be able to go in, get data, pull it out, and see what's going on in the data. Sometimes that helps you refine the business problem, but also it may help you solve the business problem too. Preparing data is a big part. Usually they say that's like 60% of the work that you do as a data analyst. I would agree. You need to prepare it in a way that's good for analysis or good for a modeling or predictive model or for AI. That's usually where a lot of the work comes in. You're cleaning things up or formatting it or summarizing it like we saw in this lecture. This one is for data science, so building the model, but this would also start to be where you're starting to build those reports and summarizing the data the way you need it. Testing and evaluating, building a repeatable process, and storing historical data so that you can repeat that data that you've seen in the past. That's a big deal because oftentimes in a system, data is changing because of what's being entered or what's being transformed. So you're trying to preserve history and make these reports repeatable. So if you do something,
I just want to ask you, like, if you know, as far as like when you do it, like, can you do it so that it's automatically updated, or is it just like at one point in time? Like the SQL query is like, you know, automatically updates, like a dashboard could be automatically updated with the newest data, or or is it just like one point in time, like a report, just a product?
So often it's one time, a point in time when you run that query. It's like the data as of when it is at that moment. But we will see part of this is that we'll build an analytical model to be able to store data so you preserve history so that it's always the same when you go backwards. So you can build processes to update the data and then preserve the data.
And build processes to update the data.
Yeah.
And keep that query kind of like, you just run it.
Yep, that's our class 7, the next to the last. Well, before we do the final and finalize the project, we'll do some advanced functions that help us do that. And then that's what data engineering is all about too. If you're excited about that piece of it. Creating repeatable processes, like automating and creating repeatable processes with data. Yeah, and engineering solutions that are efficient and practical. Oftentimes it's in thinking I've done data architect rules where you set up data architectural where you set up like the cloud environment for the engineers to build inside of like a Microsoft Azure environment. So you're setting up the infrastructure as an architect, and the engineer is like building all those pipelines and code and repeatable processes and monitoring it. Yep, and data scientists are building the models, but often times the lines are blurred too, or doing a lot of different things.
It's kind of cool. I've seen it's like, you know, like a diagramming tool.
Yeah.
But these are the different tables.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they're like dragging and dropping.
Okay.
Visually modeling because they're thinking about all the operations, say within that company. They're thinking like, okay, we're gonna need that. Yep. But then we store it. But then what happens? You know, how they're thinking about all the things. Right?
There's a whole discipline of data management under the scenes too. Won't do that in this class, but could be its own class. So class project, I generated this image with Wally, or the Dolly. So she is the CEO of Blockbuster Video. If anybody remembers Blockbuster Video going bankrupt. She's been watching her company's profitability decline over the past year. So assume like this is in the past, think 1994. Or 2004 or 2006, in a quarterly meeting, boss lady, she addresses her team here. She says, our business model depends on maximizing the utilization of our DVD inventory. I want to know which film categories generate the most revenue per DVD copy we own. And then we need to optimize our purchasing strategy to focus on profitable categories rather than just buying what's popular. So here's the CIO. He's kind of shocked by the whole thing. He mentions that they have all the data in their system, which is behind the scenes the Scalar database that we're going to use, but no one's analyzed it from that angle before. So in comes a data analyst. Okay. So business questions just in general. They're often useful questions and they require basic domain knowledge. Usually data analyst knows a little bit about the data or the system, or they go and learn about it. And then some of the effective questions that the analyst would ask of management is things that lead to action or specific. They help clarify understanding, focus on important features or underlying issues. I say as a data analyst, the features are probably processes. Underneath the covers, you'll find some processes may or may not be working correctly. Okay. So some of the questions you might ask about sales are like, how many people are seeing ads, conversion rates. These are like marketing type. Who are the performing top salespeople in operations? How much does it cost to make our product? And then financial risk, like looking at customers. That's actually what I did at my first job at First National, is analyzing the risk of customer default on credit cards. So you
After you had your master's degree?
Yeah. So you learn a ton there, and then you become you become a domain. You're like a domain, you have the domain knowledge, at least basic domain knowledge, and then build on it. Okay. So these project milestones, they are each going to be part of this project, and you'll do this as homework. So homework 1, it'll involve milestones 1 and 2. So setting up SQL Workbench, being able to work through it. If you haven't set up my SQL Workbench, please let me know. But then starting to apply the things that you'll learn in each lecture. So homework 1 will be that, and using my SQL Workbench, and then querying data for and understanding relevant information in the Scalar database. And I'll give you the assignments will guide you to questions that you would ask, and how you'd want to approach this database to understand like what's in it and what type of questions you want to ask, and then what type of questions the CEO is asking. And then I have one of itself, the Scalar database. So I put this in the Slack channel if you want to download it. I give a description of the Scalar database. It says represented the design and IT system that manages DVD rental store business, but it has films and inventory. So it has a list of the films and what levels of inventory they have, their customers and what they rented, the staff that they employ in the stores, film categorization, and actors. So what genre? So that's one of the questions specifically she asked about, and some of the actors that are in those movies, and then additional information about the store locations. They have multiple store locations. So you can imagine like it could even be an issue of certain stores or whatever it might be. So really it's like a data analyst, you're diving deeper to try to, and examining the data to try to help refine the question, or like spot those opportunities, or help them pick out the specific challenges and help them solve those problems. Does anybody online have any questions about what the class project is all about? I have a homework that I will post there after class. So the homework looks like this, is that it explains a little bit of the background, making sure MySQL Workbench is installed, exploring these database tables in the Scalar database, and then writing basic queries to answer some of these questions after you've explored the tables and some of the data in them. You'll filter some of them, so that's where you use some of the where clauses. You can get, filter some of the PG rated films that have a rental rate above $3. So she'll have some specific questions. And then analyzing revenue. So rental rates across films and so forth. Actually, this might be, just looking at this, it might be a lot. So if anybody has a challenge with it, or if it's taking a lot of time, please let me know. But you can imagine where you just write queries where you count the amount, how many films are in the database, and some of the 5 longest films. If it takes, I have the due date, so I have some submission guidelines. You can put these in a Microsoft Word type document. Have put your SQL queries inside of the document, and I'll run them myself. You don't necessarily have to put the results of the queries. It is helpful for me to do that, to reproduce the results and any written answers you have
Screenshots?
to these questions. Yeah. And then you could submit it to that document. It doesn't have to be a PDF, but you could submit that document to me as a direct message in Slack. So I have a target of this being, I have some grading criteria I'll do for the first time. It's usually been pass or no pass. I'll try to put some grades to this. Due date of Monday. It's kind of a loose due date. You don't necessarily have to have it done by Monday, but like I said, at the beginning of class, you want to try to keep up with this as much as possible to stay on track for each one of the homeworks in the class projects. If this gets to be a lot of work or you get stuck, please let me know. Feel free to write your own queries and use AI to do so. However you solve it is okay. Just make sure you're using it as an aid for learning to answer the questions. So if you're doing things like generating the query, just write like your understanding of the query that you created. I'm okay with whatever means you have to complete this assignment. And ultimately, I think it's the student takes out, it's your guys' learning. So ultimately, I mean, you could do all of it and just generate it by AI, but it wouldn't be that useful in learning the material. It's really your choice. I have a different way of saying that, but I don't have any problem with you doing that, especially if you get to the end and you fully understand the assignment. So this is like the first part of where you start to understand the business problem and understand the data. And then you should be able to draw some good insights or thoughts on her question from this. And then we'll just continue down that path by adding more, getting more and more layers of information.
That document right there with all the requirements?
Yep, I am going to put this here in Slack. I'll just go ahead and do that right now. Okay. Let me go ahead and copy that in there. With the remaining time, I'd like to do a few more examples. Paste. Okay. desktop. Oops. Okay. You're just trying to find that file. Oh, so many files on my computer. Word. Just 1 second and I'll have that in there. So back to my desktop. And then I will, from here to the rest of the class, I'll provide homework at the end of each lecture, due the following Monday. Homework 1, due 3/17/25. That should be Monday. Okay. So the first time we're going through this, if you get stuck and it's taking you a lot of time, please let me know. It's not the intent. It's just to give you something that, like a really practical way that you may use this, the skills that you learned in this class in a business environment to answer a business question, and even diving down into the system to be able to do it. Okay, let's do some quick exercises here together. This picture's starting to age me, but it's like one of my favorite commercials. So this is what you'll be before you know SQL, and this is what you'll be after you know SQL. You'll be the Jack guy over here. All right, so I have a bunch of practice exercises on the world schema. So what's good about the world schema is that it's very simple and straightforward. You can even look up your schema. It is. You have like 4 minutes. Setting up the world database. There's all sorts of information about it, but it's super straightforward like this. You just have your country, your city, and country language. Even the names of the tables are pretty descriptive. Like, these are countries, information about countries. Each row in the table is a country, or information about a single country. And here are all the columns that describe that country. And then the cities inside of the countries, and then the languages that they speak in the country. So it has both official and unofficial. And I believe this asks a little bit of everything from those tables, the practice exercises. So I think this is another file I owe to everyone, because these are just for the slides. Actually, yeah, I owe everyone the slides for these, but let's just do a couple of these real quick. We can just do these by hand. I have files that I will also give you, that you can look at what the solutions would be for each one of these and run them. So if we're going to do the first one in world.city, what are the names and country codes of all the countries in the database, sorted alphabetically? So what you can do is do this as a comment, just paste that in there as a comment. So there are a couple keywords in here. Remember, we do from first, and then we select our table. So doing from world.city. What are the names and country codes of all the countries in the database? You could start by selecting star. I often do that. And then this would be sorted alphabetically by code. Actually, we'll just start with select star. I kind of like to do that because then you can see all the data that's in the table. So then you could easily choose what are the names and country codes of all the countries. So the names of the countries are there. I put backticks here because some of these are reserved keywords. And once in a while, MySQL will get it confused with that it's some keyword here, like a function keyword or some other variable. So I put the backticks in. That's next to the ones. So you select name. So that's a SQL specific. Syntax, country code, from world.city, and then you sort it using the order by, and it is 9 o'clock now. And then you could order by code. Let's go ahead and run that and see what it does for us. That gives us a pretty good result. So it's sorted by country code. And then the cities inside of each one of those. So Afghanistan, you have Kabul and Kandahar. And the other cities that are inside of that database. If you want to make sure that you're getting solely distinct names, always type in distinct. They should all be distinct because this is a city table. So each one of the records is
That means they only show up once.
city within the country. It should.
And so remind me again, why do you have name in quotes, but country code is not in quotes?
So name is just a keyword
Keyword?
inside of MySQL. So sometimes, or reserved words. Some of them are like select or from or order by. If for some reason you had a column named select, MySQL could get confused by that. So if you put backticks here,
Those quotes are called backticks?
yeah, next to the one on your computer, you'll know because it turns it like this dark reddish color.
Make that font larger. I'm not sure about that.
Yeah. It's like these ticks, right? Instead of, so you know if you put them in that, it's like a character value.
Yeah.
This is specific.
Kind of like an accent.
Yeah. Yep. Sometimes you'll get confused and read it the incorrect way. Name happens to be one of those.
So you put the backslash because the accent mark because why?
It's actually a reserved word, and you know that because it turns blue in MySQL Workbench.
Do you always like put the first one in with accent on it?
No. If this was something like
Reserved word, like a significant value.
Reserved words like, so the SQL interpreter differentiates it from a field name,
It's an operator or something.
like an operator or function or something like that.
And how do we know which ones are? Did you tell us something?
Because if you type it in, it'll turn blue.
Okay, so you don't want it to turn blue, you want it to turn red.
You know how you start in Excel, when you start doing the formula, you do it.
Close, yeah.
Well, what if one of your value was equal, let's say, it is equal, but the value is equal, and I'm making stuff, that's that part. So when you put them in quotes, it basically differentiates the operator equal versus a value equal. That's
So-
what it is to it.
Since I ran over on time, I'm going to record these practice exercises for everyone. I'm going to go through it, and then I'll give everyone
Really slowly.
the code for it too.
Really slowly.
I know, or
Nice
you can
and
put
slowly.
the recording in like half speed,
Yeah, put the record.
so it's super slow. But I'll record this for everyone since I didn't get to it. It's valuable, and then I'll give everyone the answers to the exercises too. With these, I want people to just give it to them because it's like we're doing these now. So I want to record these so you do these along with me, and then you can see the right answers. And that should help you with the homework also with some additional practice. And knowing like starting to answer some of these questions is then you could take that over to the homework and start to apply that on homework. Pumping your SQL skills, juicing your SQL skills. He's trying. I give him that. All right. Yeah, that's it for tonight's class. Covered the class project. I have the homework out there. If you want to jump right into the homework, by all means, but I'll record these videos tomorrow and get the practice exercises out to everyone for additional practice. And it'd be nice to record these anyway, so I could just use them in the other classes too. Recorded videos. That's it. Anybody online or here? Questions? I feel a little tired after all that information. I forgot that there's so much packed into that first one, or the first major lecture. Now I can remember why some people were saying that it goes so fast. The class goes so fast. There's a lot packed in, but we get pretty much everything you need to know in 8 classes. Well, 7 classes, really. And some really practical skills and class project. Let's see if anybody online had.
You know a lot of that anyway.
Me? No,
Most everyone's left online. Okay. I can go ahead and stop the live stream.
I really don't.
You know a lot of it.
I've done very basic SQL and for Jira, there's a Jira tool.
Yeah.
Basically
I've reported out of Jira before.
It's basically a project tool,
Okay.
and so it's basically a ticketing tool in reality, but project tickets, some ways containers to organize work. And so Jira has its own language, but you can open a back portal and query the data directly, but it's very limited. But you can do, it's called JQL. They basically ripped off SQL, and it's like a very simple layman's.
Okay.
And I learned a lot because banging my head against because it's limited, but you really need the stuff. So just play with it. And you basically learn the operators and you start Googling.
And how to put it together.
We had a back-end relational database at one of my jobs for Jira. I don't know if that's where maybe we hosted it ourselves, but maybe something to
Was it
look.
a hosted instance?
Yeah, problem.
Most of the
And
big
I
boxes.
haven't done anything like this at all, you know, as far as the logic. and-
But yeah, project management software plus other stuff on top of database.
That's what actually got me going. The previous lifetime, before my field of agile collapsed, my last gig, I discovered Power BI. So basically, it was Power BI on top of Jira, and that's what got me going with data. I found myself, my boss basically at one point, she was like, "Hey, I'm getting sucked up into high-level meetings. You're gonna be doing the reporting to everybody and anybody. It's like, well, because I basically in 4 nights I had to learn, and you get thrown in front of a very high-level committee, and basically those guys were asking for all kinds of information. So I had to learn. If it's one thing to pregame it as much as you can, and it's another thing to in real time, you have 40 people, which then are executives, and they expect you to be answering every question, you have argumentation behind it. And that was my boss's job, basically. It was more of us feeding her. But
It's taken me a long time to get good at that.
That's really intense.
To what?
To get good at that type of questioning about the analysis that you put together.
Oh, it was a lot of, some of the data was complete nonsense, and a lot of it was, they were BSing, and like, you have to really know.
Yeah, you start to see what happens when you
Right.
dig into the data.
Because at one point you almost get too dangerous with the data, and you learn the politics, right? What they want to see.
Yeah.
What they want to see, because you can uncover a lot of uncomfortable truths.
Oh,
So-
yeah.
So being thrown into it, in Power BI was very powerful, but I had never done it in that deep of a level. But it just surviving the whole thing, I found myself having a lot of fun.
It's weird what you're saying, because it's like, you're like the messenger, and there's this famous expression about like, don't kill the messenger. Like, because if you're just the messenger about the bad data or the bad results or whatever.
Well, if you're a contractor,
Yeah.
you're like the bodyguards of the president. You know, you just cannon fodder. It's like,
When something goes wrong, that's usually
and
for
she
the
was
fault
due for
people.
promotion. So she
For
was like, yeah, I'm gonna do some super high level reporting only, but it was an opportunity, you know.
Yeah, for
It
sure,
was-
for sure. Yeah, for sure.
For
Get yourself
me-
out there, yeah.
So it was fun. But you asked, like, I had experience.
that's ultimately how you learn consulting skills too, and to
'Cause
work with management.
I know string just means like characters, one, like character. That just means like characters, right? String just, I can buy it, I'll go down.
Yeah, it's like a name is a string
I just, yeah.
or any like series of characters.
I'll look at your video again.
There's
The database, they just have it as variable character lengths. It's really like a string of variable length.
462, that's just a string of characters.
That could be a number though, it depends on how you define it,
Oh, I see.
what data you define it as.
Oh, I see.
So for like numbers
String is not a number, or.
can be a string if it's defined that way,
Oh, I see, okay.
but then you could cast it or convert it to a number
Oh,
if it's a number.
think about it this way. The more complex, you basically have a bunch of characters. The more complex they are, the more the machine has energy. The machine has to use physically to not just store them, but read them.
what the relation to each
Yeah.
other character is,
So-
and one becomes a board.
So just like if you categorize stuff, it's easy. Like, oh, I have my numbers here, my letters here, and for you, it's like, hey, give me a 9, and you're not going like everywhere like crazy
Right.
looking for a 9. You're like, oh, I have the 9. So in a way, this is an easy way to categorize basically symbols for them. That's how I understand it.
Okay.
The experts here are
Yeah.
but that's how I understand it.
Yeah.
For ease, then for different operations, because when you separate the numbers, integers, and different variable characters, it helps the machine be a lot more efficient than grab it and do the operations.
So there's variable characters and then there's strings.
String's really like a variable character usually.
I'll look it up. I'll-
So in database, they define it just a little bit differently. It's variable length character strings and then set
I guess
length
that's where I don't.
character strings.
Can I look at on W3 for that? Okay. I'll.
Look at the slides get it. I've read it before, actually. I started kind of doing a self-paced course, and like I know it, but if I don't use it, I forget.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons I came here, because it's like missing 4th and 8th grade, you'll always be missing
Yeah.
like basic math and like basic history or whatever. That's why I came here to kind of think the whole thing. And what you're doing, being able to ask questions,
Yeah.
that's the valuable. Like I've asked a lot of. To somebody it might be a real dumb question, but it's stuff that helps me put the right picture in my head. Truly understand.
I don't have any experience with this, I did have an experience with Tableau, the last thing that we did, because I've made charts, you're just dragging and dropping, this is the parameter of that, and the picture comes in, because I get that, I totally get that, that was, but this one, I haven't really done any kind of query work. Well, I have in Blackbaud, the Razor's Edge database, but it was not like code, and my supervisor mentioned about SQL. And, so he knew it, I guess, but it had special, like clean, refined way for you to ask them questions.
You've done Excel, right? You've done
Yeah.
Excel
Yeah.
formulas.
Yeah.
It's not the same as the whole high level, but it's
Sometimes I'll just load an entire table into Tableau and just work with it there. I often do that instead of writing SQL. You can load the whole table.
And then you can do the query in Tableau?
Well, Tableau creates a query behind the scenes.
Right.
Whether you know it, but you can put your own custom query in there too.
Right.
We're going to learn something here in this class called views.
Okay.
It's like you can save pieces of SQL code to run them later. And that's super valuable for, what's that?
Save pieces of SQL code.
Yeah, so you can create a SQL query and save it in a view and then run the view and it produces that result. And I do that all the time for reporting or like data to create data
a
sets.
dashboard, right? Basically.
Yeah, because it'll do like the summary you need, like the time frame you need, maybe any cleaning or changes. You could do that in SQL and then just import it into Tableau. I'm a girl dad, 3 girls.
Wow.
Girls like are pretty,
You're,
hard.
do you have any boys too? Or?
No.
Oh man, I thought I was on
By,
board.
Girls are tough, so that's gonna real work.
I have lots of, oh no, they're good girls. They make it easy. My 6-year-old, she has a ton of energy and she gets in trouble a little bit, but
That one girl,
Uh,
and I feel outnumbered, but you're my hero.
12-year-old and my oldest is 16.
What is it?
My oldest is 16 and then 12 and 6.
So you spread them all pretty good.
Yeah, that's the plan. The last one was, we decided better do it now or never. Have the last one. Wife wanted a boy. Got a boy. We didn't like find out the gender or anything. We did it with that boy.
Right.
It's like it's gonna be a boy.
Yeah.
It's about like boy stuff.
Really?
I can't say when it's born. It's disappointing. Never like, oh, when you have like another kid, it wasn't disappointing, but she's like, oh, it's a girl.
They wanted,
I was hoping I was
they wanted a boy, but because as a girl, then you worry about something. I only have one, and I will watch your movie and something bad happens. You just start looking at the world.
Being a boy, I feel like it's almost worse than girls. For sure. Because I got into trouble.
Oh, yeah.
Or no, just as like a teenager, things like that, and I'm just like,
There's still a
you
lot.
worry about other boys and other things that they can get into.
Girls are still like that, like they just naturally like
But more mature,
daring, yeah.
but they're different challenges. I feel
Now you can
That's right.
I don't know, boys are kind of boys, so I don't know. There's a lot of
It's a
drama
little
with my
simple in
12.
my mind. I think, when I've done just babysitting or whatever, just like play ball, throw the ball, and like life is grand. No problems. I have my point of view. Girls are all like serious.
My 12-year-old.
Like you can sit there and like throw the ball back and forth for like an hour, and they're like,
She'll be
good.
13 in May.
They're like good. That's good. It's totally fine. They're powerful.
You're my hero. I enjoy it.
Appreciate that. It's good. I enjoy it, actually.
We had a joke.
Never would have known it.
Feels forever and ever. Just my boy and I. Joking. My wife, if you get a dog, it'll be a female dog, and the cat and the mouse, everything's going to know and stuff. But it's fun. Like I enjoy it.
Yeah, I do have one male dog, so, and then a female dog too. So
See you guys Monday.
pretty much all you get used to it. Good job. See you Monday. All right. We'll go ahead and conclude this lecture. So this is the end of the lecture for lecture number 2, writing queries in the ODSA SQL 101 data manipulation and management class. This is Jeremy Bergman, the professor. For the next lecture, we'll learn about extracting and storing data. So this is creating databases and tables to be able to store data that you capture from systems or for analytical purposes. And then once the data is in there, to be able to insert new data, update it, and delete. So that's it for tonight's lecture. Said Jeremy Bergman for Omaha Data Science Academy, and we'll see you next time.